Yes, here we are. So obviously, you already receive a lot of information over the last 2 days about what's the meaning of climate change, where does it come from, the link between emissions of CO2 and increased temperature. Of course, climate change has a deep environmental and economic consequences. Today already a small part of it, but even much more within the next century. So there is this global target that has been decided in the past, in particular at the occasion of the COP21 in Paris, that led to the so-called Paris Agreement, to not cross the 2 degrees Celsius. That is, we should not increase average temperature on this planet by more than 2 degrees Celsius compared to what we had as a climate 2 centuries ago. So this means that from the hard science, we know that we will cross this 2 degrees Celsius target if we continue to emit more than, something like 800 gigaton of CO2. So we should not, during the 21st century, we should not emit more than 800 gigaton of CO2 if we want to stay below the 2 degrees Celsius target that we collectively decided to accept. So 800 gigaton of CO2 probably don't tell you much. So let me give you an additional information. Every year over the last decade, we emit on average something like 52 gigaton of CO2 every year. It has been a little smaller in 2020 and probably in 2021 because of the pandemic, but prior to that, the last 2 years, we emitted 52. So when you divide 800 by 52, you see that we don't have much time to reduce our emission if we want to keep that target alive. And we will not be saved by the limited reserve of fossil fuels. I mean, you know that these emissions come mostly from burning oil, gas, and coal. And we know that those reserves are limited. However, if we burn all those reserves currently existing underground, it will not be 800 gigaton of CO2 that we will emit. It's 20,000 gigaton of CO2 that will be emitted. So you see that today, the problem is we should convince everyone not to use anymore fossil fuels reserve, fossil fuels energies, and to replace those sources of energy, because we need energy to live. We need to replace those sources of energy by something else that are decarbonated. The problem is, over the last 2 centuries, the prosperity of the Western world has been based on the fact that those fossil fuels, starting with coal and then moving to oil and more now gas, and those sources of energy are very cheap. And on top of that, they are extremely easy to use. In a liter of gasoline, you have such a concentration of energy. It's easy to transport, it's easy to burn, it's easy to generate electricity with that. It's easy to use it for transportation or for eating purpose. So you see, and we need to replace this source of cheap and easy to use energy by source of energy decarbonated are still quite expensive and difficult to use. I mean, solar energy or wind electricity, what do you do when you have no sun and no wind? Taking into account the fact that we are still almost unable to store electricity on a massive scale. So that's the problem. Okay, we need to accept to sacrifice those easy, cheap source of energy and to accept to use other sources of energy that are much more costly to produce. And so the big picture is that is costly. I mean, the idea that this energy transition will be very useful to reduce the electricity bill or to create millions of jobs, well, that's basically not true. I mean, at the macro level, replacing something cheap that's something more expensive cannot be a good news for society. And in France, in particular, we had this yellow vest movement 2 years ago. Those people, I mean, said, climate change, why not trying to do something about that? But the end of the month is more important than the end of the world. At the end of the day, we need to keep our incomes unchanged. Okay, of course, why do we do that? We do that because if we don't reduce our emission, I mean, the average temperature on this planet could increase by a lot. I mean, it will not be 1.5, it will not be 2, it could be 5, 6, or 7 degrees Celsius, with huge cost, huge consequence, maybe even in terms of the possibility for human beings to live on this planet. So it's really potentially a life-threatening risk for humanity. It's very difficult to convey information to the people about the benefits of reducing emission, okay? Because when you reduce emission and you reduce the concentration of CO2 for a long period of time, and by reducing the the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere, you generate benefits in terms of a smaller increase in average temperature for future generations. So and economists and sociologists and biologists have been working on the impact of changing temperature on the dynamics of species living on this planet and on damages in terms of increased sea level and things like that. I'm sure you already get a lot of information about that over the last 2 days. I will not come back on that. To summarize the impact of the cost of emitting 1 ton of CO2 today, let me just, and I know it's outrageously simplifying, it's an outrageous simplification of the problem, but just to give you in 2 numbers, the consequence of emitting 1 ton of CO2 in 2021, it's equivalent in terms of intergenerational welfare to imposing a loss of 1,200 euros. I'm sorry, I'm talking here in euros, not in Canadian dollar, and I don't have in my mind the exchange rate about that, sorry about that, but it's an international summer school, so that's probably allow me to talk in euros. So when you emit 1 ton of CO2 today, the consequences of that is increased concentration of CO2, increased temperature, impact on environment, impact on human beings. You can summarize that into you generate a damage of 1,200 euros in 80 years from now. Okay, so that just to give you an idea of the numbers, so our responsibility toward future generation. Okay, so there are benefits to reduce emission. You will not impose to future generation to bear those losses. But there is a cost in the short run. So on this slide, I give you these 2 information. Reducing emission will be costly. We need to accept not using oil, coal, and gas for transportation, for heating, for electricity production. The benefit of that is to have future generation facing a better world and less economic loss associated to climate change. So you have cost and benefits. What the optimal strategy? Well, that's an ethical issue that go well beyond the economics. I agree, but the point I would like to make on this slide is it's an utopia to believe in a world of happy energy transition. Okay, the reality is, in the short run, we need to accept cost, and that's the consequence of a good understanding of our responsibilities toward future generation. So rather than having most, as we have today, most politicians saying, oh, you know, energy transition, that's good, billions of jobs in the renewable sector, smaller electricity bill, the reality is different. I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears, and sweat. That's the real world, okay? And I don't see any politician bearing this this discourse to the public. Therefore, we really face a problem in terms of the beliefs of people about whether they should benefit or they should accept sacrifices to face their responsibility to our future generation. To give you an information about the cost associated to moving from fossil fuel to renewables, here is estimation, and here are estimations, and I know those estimations are, you know, those estimations differs upon, you know, geographic location. I mean, of course, photovoltaic panels produce more electricity in the south rather than in the north. Having a windmill is probably better in the North Sea than in the Mediterranean Sea, that kind of thing. But here is so average number in terms of what we call levelized cost of electricity. So today, the cheapest way to produce electricity is to use nuclear energy. In particular, nuclear energy from nuclear plants of the second generation, not of the third generation, that is the EPR, which, as you may know, is problematic in terms of safety, I mean, cost of installation, in particular in France, but also in Finland. So it's 6 cents per kilowatt hour. And let me go to the other extreme. Solar panel, well, I know that the costs have been reduced by a large fraction over the last decade in particular. So the cost per kilowatt hour is between something like 9 to 28 cents per kilowatt hour, in particular when we take into account of the fact that this electricity is what we call non-dispatchable. That is, you cannot control when you decide to produce electricity. You produce electricity from solar photovoltaic panel only when there is sun. Okay, well, I will not spend much time also on this slide that give you information about when you do some action, climate action, what the impact on your emission. So, for example, if you decide to consume 25 kilograms of beef, that on average generates, well, most of the beef production generate not CO2, but rather methane. Methane is another greenhouse gas. But the equivalent heating effect of that methane to produce 25 kilograms of beef, it's 1.5 ton of CO2. So if you decide this year to stop eating beef, and assuming that every year you consume 25 kilograms of beef, that saves the planet of 1.5 ton of CO2. Okay, that's an example. You see, it's quite impressive. If you decide not to go, if you decide to go from San Francisco to London by flying, that generates basically 3 tons of CO2. Okay, even with the best plane we have now, which are much more energy efficient than 20 years ago, we still emit 3 tons of CO2 for that kind of flight. So, okay, and here you have other information. If you have an SUV driving 5,000 kilometers, generate basically 2 tons of CO2, and so on and so on. So that's a useful information if you want to do by yourself some maths about the impact of your effort on the global emissions of CO2. Okay. Here is the economic problem. Here is the problem we face due to climate change, and that generates much interest for the economists. Okay. Climate change, like most other pollution problem, belongs to a family of economic problem we describe as a global externality problem. And the externality problem is the following. So when, for example, when you decide to purchase an apple from the market, okay, you like apple, you like to consume apple, but it's costly to produce an apple. I mean, society has to mobilize inputs for you to get the ability to consume this apple. Okay. Is it optimal for you to consume an apple given the fact that it's costly to produce an apple? Well, you need to compare the costs and benefits at the global level, and from the normative point of view, it's socially desirable for you to consume an apple if the private benefits you get from consuming this apple is larger than the cost associated to producing that apple. Okay, but on the market, the price of that apple reveals the cost for society to produce that apple. Okay, and therefore, when you decide to consume that apple, you will compare your private benefits of consuming that apple with the cost for you to consume this apple, which is the price you pay in the market. And because the price is also the cost for society to provide you that apple, you see that you align the interest of the consumer is aligned with the common good, okay? Because the price that you pay represents the cost for society to produce that apple. The problem is completely different for climate change. When you decide to take your car rather than use your bike to go to your workplace, you take into account the benefit for you to using your car rather than your bike, the fact that you go from A to B faster in a more comfortable way. Of course, you need to purchase gasoline. You take into account of that in your decision to use your car rather than your bike, but you will not, if there is no carbon price, you will not take into account the fact that when you drive rather than use your bike, you will also generate CO2. And this CO2 will generate damages for others. Okay? And so this fact that you are not internalizing the costs for others, the damage for others, by emitting that CO2 imply that we will emit too much. I mean, many actions to drive will be socially undesirable. People should rather use their bike, but they are not because of the emissions of CO2 of driving, but they will not be incentivized to do that. Okay. The opposite version of this story is when you contemplate the possibility to switch from your car to your bike, you bear the cost of doing that. It's a rainy day. Biking is less attractive than driving. So you bear 100% of this cost of switching to a more green action, but you get zero benefits of that. The benefits is for society as a whole. Okay, so again, you are not incentivized to internalize in your decision to switch to a greener behavior, the benefit for society of doing that. That's obvious. I mean, we call that an externality problem, and it generates what we call a free riding problem. On top of that, we have 3 additional problems associated to climate change. Okay, the first one is the time dimension. Okay, most of the damage or most of the benefits of your green behavior will not be felt immediately. It will be felt in 10, 20, 30, 50, 80 years from now. Okay, so the benefits are not really present, and that's reduced incentive for the country or for the politicians to induce their people to accept to make those sacrifices, to use the bike, for example, rather than driving. Okay, the benefits of the costly action to reduce emission are too distant into the future for the people to internalize those benefits. Okay, compared to, let me give you another example of pollution. I mean, pollution from diesel car in cities. I mean, when you decide to expel cars from downtown, you almost immediately see the benefits in terms of better air, better health for the people living in the city. That's not the case for climate change. Climate change, most of the benefits are really in the distance. Remember the 80 years I mentioned in the first slide. The second tragedy of climate change is that most of the benefits of reducing emission is not for you, as I said earlier, but from the point of view of a country like Canada. Okay, the benefits for Canada to accepting to stop producing, you know, sun oil or something like that, you know, in the Alberta. The benefits, this could be very costly for Alberta province. The benefits is not for Alberta province, not even for Canada. The benefits of accepting to stop using that source of energy is for the world as a whole rather than for the Canadian. Okay, so that's a space dimension of the tragedy. So it's a spatio-temporal tragedy that, you know, we have little incentive individually to or collectively at the level of country to make the effort. On top of that, we also have what we call the carbon leakage problem. Carbon leakage comes from the fact that when one country decided to penalize emitters of CO2, in particular firms and corporations, those corporations will have the tendency to move their production from the place where there is a lot of penalty on emitting CO2 to other places, other countries where there is no such penalty. And so the consequence of that is that the climate ambitious country will just face deindustrialization, okay, with no ecological benefit. I mean, you just have emissions are still the same. They are just transferred to places where there is no penalty associated to emitting CO2. So zero ecological benefit and a lot of cost for the climate ambitious country, reduce employment, reduce value creation and GDP, with no social benefits. Okay, so all this implies that there is very little incentive for individual countries to do something for climate change. So that's generated the free riding problem. Why not just waiting that the others do something for the planet? Maybe if other people will do something, you will start to think about that yourself, but it is too costly to do that, and so you will probably forget. So the Nash equilibrium here in game theory is that nobody will do anything. Okay, there will be no emission, and we have seen that over the last 30 years. We know for more than 30 years that we have a climate change problem. And at the same time, we emit much more CO2 today than we used to emit 30 years ago. So we continue, we see that we face a dramatic situation for the future if we don't change our habits. At the same time, we reinforce those habits. Rather than solving the problem, we make the problem even worse. So that's a waiting game. We see that in all COPs. Maybe Paris COP21 was an exception, but in reality, the Paris Agreement is very weak and has probably very limited impact on actual emissions by countries. So, yeah. So the outcome is, you know, because politicians face a very difficult problem. At the same time, most of them, and I think maybe Donald Trump was an exception, but most politicians understand the physics of climate change, the consequence of doing nothing. At the same time, I mean, they are not elected by future generation. The politicians are elected by current generation. And current generation, if they do something, they will have to sacrifice some of their purchasing power or marginal welfare. And we have seen with the Yellow Vest movement in France that that may be difficult, even for a relatively small carbon tax, 44 euros per ton of CO2 in France. People revolt. They understand their responsibility to our future generation, but when their wallets is at stake, there are difficulty, and politicians understand that. So government claim ambitious emission target, but do not implement the necessary policy because they understand that that would necessarily hurt their constituents. So everyone wants to believe in the utopia of a happy transition, the politician in particular. I know very small number of politicians that claim the Churchill wording of, you know, tears and blood. Most politicians say, oh, excellent, climate change. We are so lucky to have climate change. We will create billions of good jobs. Look at Joe Biden climate plan, for example. Okay, so what should we do? So how, given this problem, how should we try to organize society to make sure that society will face the challenges of reducing emissions very fast now? So you can use, you know, intrinsic motivation of people. You can ask people, okay, we are responsible, you are responsible to future generation, please do something for that. That does not work well. We can try to use, I mean, things, an argument to make sure that most of the intrinsic motivation for people, you know, their self-esteem, their preference for having a good image to others, that is useful to induce people to do something about climate change, but we know that's not enough. And that's probably a difference between psychologists and economists. We economists believe that people are mostly selfish. They may have some intrinsic motivation, but this is typically too limited to really do something, at least at the intensity that is necessary to solve the climate change problem. So asking gently is probably useful, but that's not enough. There are also people that want to change the system. They say, the problem is free market economy. That's capitalism, that's liberalism. Let us forget about that and let us make a revolution and switch to something else, like, you know, a planet economy. Yeah, and during the 20th century, we have seen different revolutions that generate that kind of thing. We must recognize that those countries that implemented that revolution, alternative to capitalism or free market economy, were not very good in terms of environmental success. And then there is a possibility to perform a myriad of climate micro policies, like, you know, feed-in tariff for solar electricity, subsidies for purchasing electric car, subsidies to retrofit apartments and housing units. That's useful. That's often very costly per ton of CO2 saved. I will come back to that in a minute. Yeah, by the way, here is an example. So here is an example of a micro climate policy that helped France to reduce emissions of CO2. So in 2010, the French government implemented 5 years earlier, in fact, a system to provide incentive for people to put photovoltaic panels on their roof. And the incentive scheme was you sign an agreement with the state that will purchase back your kilowatt hours produced by those photovoltaic panels at a fixed price for 20 years. Okay, and the fixed price per kilowatt hours in 2010, organized by the French government, was 60 cents per kilowatt hour. So if you remember that I told you that the cost of electricity in France from the nuclear, and you may know that 75% of the French electricity is produced with nuclear, you see that this system increased the cost of electricity by a factor 10, moving from 6 cents per kilowatt hour nuclear to 60 cents per kilowatt hour photovoltaic panel. So there is a benefit for that. Well, nuclear electricity do not emit CO2. Suppose that the photovoltaic panels is a substitute for the electricity mix in Europe. Okay, and we may argue about that. And keep in mind that the kilowatt hour produced by the electricity mix in Europe produce 400 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. So you see that this system is a system that incentivizes people to contribute to reducing emissions of CO2 at some cost. That's exactly the kind of thing I said earlier. Well, what's the cost and the benefit? The cost is increasing the price of kilowatt hour by 54 cents. And the benefits is you reduce emission by 400 grams. Well, when you do the math, and it's obvious, it's just a fraction, this means that it costs the French citizen 1,300 euros to save 1 ton of CO2. Okay, that's very expensive. Let me give you another example of an action to reduce emissions of CO2 in Europe. One of the most obvious actions in Europe is to replace coal to produce electricity by natural gas. I know natural gas emits CO2. That's not the best thing to have in mind. It's less good than photovoltaic panel, for example. But you must know that when switching from coal to natural gas, you emit basically 50% less CO2 by doing that per kilowatt hour. So when you do the same kind of math as in the previous slide, and you see the details on this slide, it costs 36 euros per ton of CO2 to switch from coal to natural gas. In Europe, because we don't have shale gas, coal is cheaper than natural gas, which is not the case in North America because of the shale gas boom, I should say. So, but yeah, so switching from coal to natural gas is expensive. It has a benefit because natural gas produces less emissions of CO2. So you see there is a cost and a benefits in here. We have 36 euros per ton of CO2. The bottom line here is that in France in 2010, we accept to spend billions of euros to produce photovoltaic panels on the roofs of the household at the cost of 1,300 euros per ton of CO2 saved. And at the same time in Europe, we decline the idea to switch from coal to natural gas to produce electricity. In Poland, 80% of the electricity is produced using coal. In Germany accepted to eliminate coal from its electricity mix by the year 2038. Okay. Well, I don't have much time now to go into the details. I will not cover that. Yes, Nadia is appearing, so I have 10 minutes to go. That's good. Yes, the problem here, I don't see the title of my slide. That's always the problem with Zoom. Yes, so the point here, so you know that economists disagree on almost everything. Okay, they just fight against each other. They never agree on many things like reduction of debt. Here for climate change, most economists agree. And we have, we had over the last few years, a lot of survey demonstrating that people, I mean, academic economists are on both sides of the Atlantic, by the way, are all agreeing on one thing. In the best way the best way to organize society as a whole to reduce emission and to face the challenge of the energy transition at the least cost for the people is to impose a carbon price, okay? And by imposing a carbon price, okay, you induce people to internalize the costs, the damage associated to their emission, as if they would be the victim of those emissions. You know, remember the problem, the initial problem of this externality problem. When I do an effort to reduce emission, I bear 100% of the cost and I get 0% of the benefit. If we impose a price on carbon, and if this price reflects the damage generated by 1 ton of CO2 by your emission, you see that exactly as for my story of the apple, you induce people to internalize the consequence of your decision to consume your apple or to emit CO2. If this price of carbon is equal to the marginal damage of CO2, you see that you realign the private interest with the common good, exactly as when on the market for apples. Okay, so that's the idea, and this price should be unique in the Western world. There should be only one carbon price, maybe 80 euros per ton of CO2. If I face a price of 80 euros per CO2, and if you know, all the emitters of CO2 on this in this country face the same price, we will all get the incentive to make all the actions to reduce emission that cost less than this price, this 80 euros per ton of CO2. If by replacing my my heating system using natural gas by using a small windmill, if it costs me less than 80 euros per ton of CO2 saved, I will have the incentive to do that because it will save me the price of carbon that I will not have to pay anymore because I do this green action. Okay, so and everybody will have the same incentive, and so we can expect that in that society, all actions that cost less than 80 euros per ton of CO2 will be implemented. Okay, so that's the idea of a carbon tax or a carbon price. We can implement that carbon price either through a tax, but we can also do that through a market for permits of emission. That is, we have that in Europe and we have that in Quebec, joined with California, I believe. So we have a market where the European Union determines the cap, the number of permits that will be distributed to the market player or sold through an auction, and that determines the total quantity of emissions of CO2 that will be actually put in place or emitted by the participant. If a participant, like a big steel company, emit more than the number of permits that it will have to purchase those permits on the market at the minimum price on that market, and they will get the incentive to reduce their emissions if their technology to reduce emission as a cost per ton of CO2 saved less than the price of the permit on the market. Yes, so let me. I have another 2 minutes to go or 3 minutes to go. Let me tell you a few words about well, maybe this one. One word on the distribution problem. It's true that when you impose a carbon tax, you increase inequalities in society. And why is it the case? It's the case because poorer people devote a larger fraction of their income for energy expenditure. Okay, so therefore, when you increase the price of energy, well, poorer people will be more impacted in relative terms compared to the wealthier people. So it's a problem. It's a problem that means that, because we, in one way or another, we need to increase the price of energy in order to provide incentive. We increase inequality. Let me give you an example. Feed-in tariff for solar and wind. I told you we multiply by 10 the cost of the kilowatt-hour produced in France in 2010 by doing that. The consequence is that the price of the electricity in France was increased in 2010. Because poor people devote a larger fraction of their revenue to purchase electricity, this increased price increase inequalities. What is good with the carbon tax? So the feed-in tariff, you get the problem, you cannot solve it. But with the carbon tax, you have a carbon dividend, you have a fiscal revenue generated by the tax, of course, and you can use it to redistribute the carbon dividend, as we call it, specifically to the poorer, to the lower decile of the distribution of income. So you see, the carbon tax, the argument of the redistributive argument is rather favorable to the carbon tax compared to alternative strategies, contrary to what most people believe. Nadia, do you have 2 minutes or not?
I can give you 2 minutes for sure.
Okay, thanks.
So that you can finish that, no problem.
So let me finish with the question of what should be that price? What should be the price of carbon? I told you the price of carbon should be equal to the present value of the damage generated by emitting that carbon in the atmosphere. I told you maybe it could be 80 euros per ton of CO2. Well, at the same time, I told you in my first slide that emitting 1 ton of CO2 generated damage which is approximately 1,200 euros, but in 80 years from now. So the question, a deep question in economics is, how do we penalize the future? Because it's the future, it's not the present. Of course, when you, the psychologists here in this room, in this virtual room, know the marshmallow problem, where you ask people, you can have 1 marshmallow now, or you can have 2 marshmallow in 15 minutes from now. And many people prefer the 1 marshmallow to now rather than 2 marshmallow in 15 minutes from now. So to give you the idea that people favor the present. Well, here the problem is not exactly the same, because the person, if you don't reduce emission now, you will not be the victims of your absence of effort. It will be the future generation. Okay, so the marshmallow argument is not very good. It's really an ethical issue where you compare a cost for someone and a benefit for someone else. So why in economics do we discount the future? Why do we penalize investment project action today whose benefits are rather in the distant future rather than for tomorrow? Well, we do that because if we believe in a growing economy, and I know we may be skeptical about that, but if we suppose that for the next century, the economy will continue to grow, the future generation will be better off than us. They will consume more than us. And with the rate of growth of 2% per year, people living in a century from now will consume basically 4 to 5 times more goods and services than us. So when we think about how much sacrifice we should do to help those future generations who will be 4 or 5 times wealthier than us, well, that's clear we want to do too much. And it's an ethical issue. I mean, but if we accept the idea that we are inequality averse, and you know, Thomas Piketty and a lot of economists are dealing with this question of, you know, inequalities have been increasing. Here I'm talking about intergenerational inequalities, but I believe that the problem of inequalities is something important. If we recognize that we are collectively inequality averse, we should recognize that in a growing economy, making efforts for the future is a problem. Those sacrifices increase intergenerational inequality, and therefore what we call the discount rate, the intensity of the penalization of benefits because of benefits materialize in the future rather than in the present. This discount rate is positive because of that argument. And let me just finish with that. And then, of course, the debate is we are not so sure that in the future generation will be better off than us. And we should recognize that there is a lot of uncertainty about that. Economists are talking about, things like secular stagnation, the fact that maybe for 1 century or 2 or 3 centuries, we will not have economic growth anymore. We could even have a new pandemic next year. And an additional loss in GDP by 10 or 20%, something like that, and that could happen more and more frequently. So, and then the question is, how do we take into account of this uncertainty in the way we determine the intensity of the penalization of the future compared to the present, and therefore an application to the pricing of carbon. Okay, but let me stop here, and I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Christian,
for
for
the
that
comments
wonderful talk.